The fog rolled in from the Atlantic, thick and colorless, wrapping Brooklyn's waterfront in silence. Just after dawn, a tugboat captain spotted something tangled in driftwood near the old Navy Yard pier. When the police arrived, they found a man's body, hands wired behind his back, a neat hole behind his right ear, and concrete dust clinging to his shoes. No identification, no name, just another ghost from the underworld. Detectives recognized the signs. This wasn't personal. It was procedure, the quiet, clinical disposal of a problem. The men on the street knew this was the work of an organization that didn't exist on paper, a group that killed for every major mafia family in America, with the precision of a business transaction. They called it Murder, Incorporated. From a small candy store in Brownsville, Brooklyn, orders were whispered, contracts sealed and bodies buried. The killers, dock workers, barbers, and neighborhood toughs, punched a clock of blood. Bosses Louis, Lepke, Buchalter, and Albert the Mad Hatter. Anastasia had turned homicide into an industry. For nearly a decade, they enforced the Syndicate's code across the country, ensuring that every murder had a price and every silence had a cost. Once the work was done, the streets were scrubbed clean, the files burned, and the witnesses gone. The man in the East River would never be identified, but his death, like hundreds of others, was a chilling message. In the world of organized crime, justice didn't come from a courtroom. It came from a contract. New York, 1931. The city was still reeling from the last echoes of the Castellamarese War, a bloody civil conflict that had turned the American Mafia against itself. Bodies had piled up in alleys and tenement stairwells, victims of shifting loyalties and old country pride. When the smoke cleared, a new order emerged. Charles "Lucky" Luciano stood at its center. Smooth, calculating, and modern-minded, he saw that the old ways, the Sicilian codes, the feuds, the chaos, were bad for business. The future, he believed, was organization, efficiency, a criminal syndicate that ran like a corporation. In 1931, Luciano and his allies, Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, Joe Adonis, formed the Commission, a national board of directors for organized crime. Each family kept its own territory, its own profits, but all disputes would now be settled through this council. No more random shootings, no more gang wars. Discipline would be enforced from the top down. But even a board of crime bosses needed enforcers. Rules meant nothing without consequences. Luciano needed a unit that could reach anywhere, quiet, loyal, and invisible. A death squad without family allegiance, a national insurance policy for the underworld. He found his instrument in two men who could not have been more different, and yet perfectly aligned. Louis Lepke Buchalter, a Jewish gangster from the Lower East Side, was not a street brawler. He was a businessman who treated crime like accounting, numbers, contracts, deadlines. He built empires out of labor racketeering, unions, trucking, and garment industries, earning millions while never lifting a gun himself. Lepke understood control through systems, not chaos. Then there was Albert Anastasia, known to everyone as the Mad Hatter. Born in Calabria, hardened on Brooklyn's docks, Anastasia was raw violence wrapped in discipline. He'd once been convicted of murder, escaped execution, and returned to the waterfront with the calm assurance of a man who no longer feared death. Where Lepke brought brains, Anastasia brought absolute terror. Their alliance was unorthodox, a Jewish racketeer and an Italian killer bound by ambition. But under Luciano's vision, ethnic lines no longer mattered. Profit did. The two men began quietly assembling a network of killers, men who would take orders not from one family, but from the syndicate itself. Their headquarters was anything but grand. At 427 Saratoga Avenue in Brownsville, Brooklyn, a narrow storefront called the Midnight Rose sat beneath the hum of the elevated train. To the neighborhood, it was just a candy store, a place where kids bought licorice and sodas, where the owner, a grinning man named Abe Kid Twist Reles, seemed always ready with a joke. But behind the counter, in a small back room that smelled of cigar smoke and gun oil, Reles managed something far darker. A black rotary phone sat on a shelf beside a ledger, names, dates, and cryptic initials scrawled inside. When that phone rang, It meant a life had just been bought and sold. The commission issued the orders. Reles relayed them to trusted men. Each contract moved like a business transaction, clean, fast, and untraceable. No questions, no personal motives. The targets were rivals, informants, or anyone who threatened the Syndicate's stability. The killers gathered at the midnight rows after hours. They played cards, traded insults, and waited for the next delivery. Outside, Brownsville's streets buzzed with the noise of streetcars and factory whistles, but inside, the air was thick with tension. These weren't hot-headed gangsters looking for glory. They were professionals in the trade of death. By 1931, the machinery was in motion. Murder was no longer random. It was systematic. The mob had discovered industrial efficiency and weaponized it. And from that small candy store in Brooklyn, America's first organized murder corporation was born. The Midnight Rose candy store became more than a front. It became a headquarters of death disguised by peppermint jars and soda bottles. In the back room, beneath the buzz of a single light bulb, the most efficient killing operation in America took shape. Murder Incorporated was not chaos. It was logistics. A system. Every man had a role, every role a purpose. There was no improvisation, no drunken brawls, no vendettas. This was murder stripped of emotion, designed, scheduled, and executed with factory precision. Abe Kid Twist Reles acted as both enforcer and dispatcher. His word carried the weight of a contract. He handled communication between the syndicate and the killers, translating orders into action. To the untrained ear, his language was harmless. "We need to deliver a package," or "the contract's ready to go." In Brownsville, those phrases meant death was already on the calendar. Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss was the executioner's executioner, a man whose cruelty was matched only by his meticulousness. He favored the ice pick, striking cleanly behind the ear. It left no blood trail, no echo of a gunshot. Strauss kept mental notes on each kill, times, angles, mistakes, perfecting his technique like a craftsman. When he smiled, it was usually before the first scream. Harry Happy Maione, with his slicked hair and razor grin, led his own squad. Despite the nickname, there was nothing cheerful about him. He was the field commander, the man who chose the time, the car, the alley. His hits were punctual. His men rarely missed. Frank Dasher Abundando drove the cars. He never hesitated, never looked back. When bullets flew, he kept both hands steady on the wheel. He could disappear into Brooklyn traffic faster than any police cruiser could follow. Martin Bugsy Goldstein organized the flow, locations, schedules, backup plans. He treated every contract like a ledger entry. One mistake, one witness, and he personally erased it. And then there was Emmanuel Mendy Weiss, Lepke Buchalter's right hand, the bridge between the business side and the killing floor. Mendy wasn't a brute. He was an administrator. He made sure payments arrived, silence was kept, and the syndicate's orders remained unquestioned. Weapons were chosen like tools in a workshop. Ice picks for quiet rooms, garrotes for confined spaces, pistols only when necessary, and always wiped clean, shells pocketed, barrels filed down afterward. Every job ended with a cleanup crew. Bodies were dumped in swamps, incinerators, or tenement basements. If a man's face needed to vanish, acid took care of the rest. Each hit followed the same rhythm: surveillance, isolation, execution, disposal. The killers learned patience. They studied routines, what street the target walked, which door he used, who he trusted. Weeks of observation ended in seconds of violence. Then they vanished like smoke. Payment came in cash, usually between $1,000 and $5,000, depending on difficulty and distance. The money was split evenly among participants. There was no bragging, no trophies, just another day's work. Between 1931 and 1941, their efficiency turned staggering. Police records, later pieced together by prosecutors, estimated between 400 and 1,000 murders linked to the Brownsville crew. Not one conviction during those years could be tied directly to them. They killed union organizers who defied Lepke's rackets. They silenced informants before subpoenas could be served. They eliminated rivals before negotiations began. Every corpse was a memo written in blood, a reminder that the Commission's word was law. To the outside world, Brownsville remained an unremarkable neighborhood of brick houses and candy stores, but beneath its sidewalks ran an invisible current of fear. Everyone knew the rules: keep your mouth shut, pay your dues, and never, ever cross a man connected to Saratoga Avenue. By 1936, Murder, Inc. had become more than an enforcement arm. It was an institution, an organized system of death that moved across state lines, untraceable and unfeeling. The mob had found its perfect weapon, a corporation with no conscience. Louis Lepke Buchalter didn't wear flashy suits or carry a gun. He didn't have to. His power came from paper, ledgers, payrolls, and union lists. From a dim office above a garment factory on 7th Avenue, he controlled the sweat of 10,000 workers and the muscle of 100 killers. Every extorted dollar, every strike, every murder for hire flowed through his desk like an accountant balancing the books. To him, murder wasn't chaos, it was management. Lepke's empire ran on two fronts: the legitimate facade of labor racketeering and the dark machinery of Murder, Inc. One fed the other. When a business owner refused to pay protection, a union leader resisted his orders, or a rival hijacked a truck route, a phone call went out from Lepke's office to Brownsville. Within days, the problem disappeared, permanently. Fear was his currency, order his obsession. He once told a lieutenant, "If one man can say no to me, they all will, and then the business is dead." To keep that order, the Commission authorized every contract. No one was killed without approval from the board: Luciano, Lansky, Costello, and their peers. Murder was bureaucracy now, signed off like an expense report. A killing in Chicago might be cleared in Manhattan before the body even hit the floor. This system created a fragile equilibrium, violence in service of peace. The families didn't need to fight wars anymore. Disputes were handled like legal arbitration: final, absolute, and terminal. Victims varied: a shop steward who talked too much, a bookmaker short on payments, a young soldier who bragged in the wrong bar. Sometimes the motive was smaller: an insult, a delay, a look that hinted at disloyalty. In Lepke's world, arrogance was treason. His reach spread far beyond New York. Through trucking unions, garment manufacturers, and longshoremen, Lepke's influence touched Chicago, Detroit, even California. The Syndicate's rackets depended on trust and fear, and Murder, Inc. guaranteed both. Each job came with paperwork, metaphorically speaking: the authorization, the fee, the cleanup. Payments were logged, expenses deducted, profits reinvested. Lepke treated death as overhead. The killers were employees, the victims, liabilities. Albert Anastasia oversaw the enforcement from the Italian side, the Mad Hatter ensuring contracts stayed clean. Together, they were the Syndicate's internal affairs department. If a boss suspected betrayal in his ranks, Lepke's men handled it. If a witness whispered to the police, Anastasia's killers silenced him before the subpoena arrived. This was discipline by design. It allowed the Commission to expand without splintering, to dominate every major city without another Castellamarese-style war. Murder, Inc. became the unspoken glue holding the Mafia together, a reminder that even the powerful could die by the same quiet methods they'd ordered for others. Between 1933 and 1936, the profits were immense. Millions flowed from union extortion, garment rackets, and trucking kickbacks. Each dollar was protected by fear. Each silence bought with blood. Louis Buchalter wasn't just a gangster. He was a corporate executive of organized crime, presiding over a business where the final audit was always done in the dark, and as long as the killings stayed invisible, the system worked perfectly. By the mid-1930s, Murder, Inc. had become more than a rumor whispered in police precincts. It was the invisible hand that shaped power inside the Commission. When the bosses needed order, they didn't hold meetings, they made examples. 3 murders, in particular, defined their reach and precision. Dutch Schultz, the hit that saved the Syndicate, 1935. Arthur Flegenheimer, better known as Dutch Schultz, was a gangster who mistook arrogance for invincibility. From his Harlem empire, he made millions off bootlegging and numbers rackets. But when Special Prosecutor Thomas E. Dewey began targeting organized crime, Schultz wanted Dewey dead. The commission saw the danger immediately. Killing a state prosecutor would bring the full weight of government against them. Luciano warned him, "You touch Dewey, you bring heat on all of us." Schultz didn't care. At a secret meeting in 1935, the bosses voted. Schultz had become a liability. A contract was approved. On October 23, 1935, at the Palace Chop House in Newark, Schultz sat with 3 of his men, eating soup and boasting about Dewey's impending demise. Outside, Murder, Inc. assassins crept through the kitchen, Charles Workman and Mendy Weiss, both seasoned professionals. Workman entered first. He drew a .45 automatic and fired twice into Schultz's body, then turned the gun on his lieutenants. Glass shattered, dishes fell, and the room filled with the smell of cordite and blood. Schultz was found hours later in a Newark hospital, barely alive, whispering nonsense about taxes and beer before dying the next day. Dewey lived. Luciano's empire survived. The Syndicate had proven a lesson. No man, no matter his rank, was above the Commission's law. Joseph Rosen, The Death of a Candy Store Man, 1936. A year later, the order came down from Louis Buchalter himself. Joseph Rosen, a mild Brooklyn candy store owner, had once worked for Lepke's trucking companies. When federal agents began questioning him about labor racketeering, he hinted that he might cooperate. Lepke knew what that meant. Testimony, exposure, collapse. In September 1936, Rosen was told to shut his store early. That evening, passers-by saw flames rising from a parked sedan on Ocean Parkway. Inside, they found Rosen's body, burned beyond recognition. An autopsy revealed he'd been shot before the fire. Neighbors said Rosen was kind, polite, and harmless. But to Lepke, he was a loose thread. The hit sent a message across every union and warehouse floor: talk to the cops, and you burn. The Rosen murder would later come back to haunt Lepke. It was the crime that sealed his fate. But in 1936, it was just another successful contract. Harry, Big Greenie Greenberg, Murder Coast to Coast, 1939. By 1939, Lepke's world was tightening. Federal pressure mounted, indictments piled up. He needed control and silence. One name kept resurfacing: Harry Big Greenie Greenberg, a longtime associate who had fled New York for California after a falling out with Lepke's crew. Rumors spread that Greenberg was talking to investigators. That was enough. Lepke ordered a hit: cross-country, clean, and final. In November 1939, Bugsy Siegel and Whitey Krakow, both connected to Murder Inc., tracked Greenberg to his apartment in Hollywood. They waited outside his car. When Greenberg stepped into the night air, a burst of gunfire ripped through him. He collapsed on the curb, dead before the echoes faded. It was the Syndicate's first documented coast-to-coast assassination, a message that no one, not even in Los Angeles, could outrun the Brooklyn machine. By 1940, the pattern was unmistakable. The Syndicate had standardized death across America. From Newark to Hollywood, a single phone call could end a life with military precision. Each of these killings served the same purpose: maintain order, protect profit, and remind every man in the underworld that disobedience was fatal. But the very efficiency that made Murder Inc. unstoppable would soon make it vulnerable. Each corpse left a trail, each trail a witness, and one of those witnesses, Abe Kid Twist Reles, was about to start talking. By 1940, Louis Lepke Buchalter was a ghost haunting his own empire. Once the most powerful labor racketeer in America, he now moved from safe house to safe house, never sleeping in the same bed twice. The newspapers called him Public Enemy Number 1. For the first time in U.S. history, the FBI had declared open season on a mob boss. Federal indictments piled up: extortion, conspiracy, and murder. His network still operated, but it was fraying. Men who once waited for his orders now waited for their own indictments. The unions that had made him rich were crawling with federal agents, and every knock at the door felt like a death sentence. Lepke turned to old allies: Albert Anastasia, Lucky Luciano, Jacob Gura Shapiro. anyone who could shield him from the dragnet. But even within the syndicate, whispers spread. Lepke's finished. The commission valued stability, not fugitives. While Lepke vanished underground, the real fracture came from within. In Brooklyn, Abe Kid Twist Reles, one of Murder Inc.'s most feared killers, found himself trapped. Arrested in 1940 for multiple murders, Reles had spent years enforcing Lepke's orders: ice pick killings, disappearances, clean jobs that left no trace. Now, the same system that had rewarded him with cash and protection was preparing to fry him in Sing Sing's electric chair. Prosecutors offered him a choice: silence and death, or cooperation and a chance to live. Reles hesitated only once before giving his answer. "I can name names, dates, everything," he told District Attorney William O'Dwyer. "I know who ordered the hits and who carried them out." That single statement detonated the underworld. Over nights of interrogation, Reles laid out the syndicate's architecture: the meetings, the code words, the payment chains, the murder orders filtered through Buchalter and Shapiro. He named Strauss, Mayone, Abandando, Weiss, dozens of men once believed untouchable. He described Rosen's burning car, Greenberg's body on a Hollywood curb, and the quiet orders that had killed Dutch Schultz. Every word was a nail in the coffin of Murder Inc. For years, the syndicate had hidden behind silence and fear, but Reles's testimony turned that silence into evidence. Detectives finally had a roadmap: addresses, safe houses, names of victims long buried in swamps and basements. Lepke's paranoia deepened. He ordered men to switch phones, change cars, even burn down entire offices to erase records. But it was too late. The FBI had his photograph on every post office wall, and the Justice Department wanted a public victory. By late 1940, the myth of the untouchable mob was broken. The press called Reles the canary who sang but couldn't fly. Prosecutors called him the key to dismantling America's deadliest criminal machine. For the first time, the law knew exactly how organized crime killed, who gave the orders, and who profited. The machine had finally been exposed. But the men it betrayed would not forgive him. The walls of justice closed in like iron bars. Abe Reles's testimony ignited a purge unlike anything the underworld had ever seen. Brooklyn District Attorney William O'Dwyer turned Reles's words into indictments: names, dates, methods, motives, all laid bare. What followed was a procession of killers dragged from their hideouts, cuffed and paraded before the press. The once invisible army of Murder Inc. now stood under blinding courtroom lights. Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, Harry Happy Mayone, Frank Dasher, Abandando, Mendy Weiss, and others, all men who'd treated murder like a profession, sat in the defendant's box staring down a justice system they had mocked for years. Strauss showed no remorse. He laughed during witness testimony, whispering jokes to Mayone. But when Reles took the stand, describing in calm surgical detail how they'd tortured victims before the kill, the laughter stopped. The jurors' faces hardened. The press called it a look inside hell's payroll. Convictions came fast. In 1941, Strauss and Mayone were sentenced to die in the electric chair. Appeals failed. On June 12, 1942, they walked down Sing Sing's final corridor, silent now, stripped of swagger. Witnesses said the smell of burnt hair lingered in the air long after the switch was thrown. But the headlines weren't done. The biggest name was yet to fall. Louis Lepke Buchalter, the man who built the machine, was finally cornered. His empire, labor rackets, extortion rings, contract killings, collapsed under the weight of testimony and paper trails. In a historic ruling, he became the only major mob boss in American history executed by the state. On March 4, 1944, Lepke followed his own hitmen into Sing Sing's chair. He died without speaking a word. Yet not every ghost of Murder Inc. was buried. Albert Anastasia, the co-founder, the man who'd taught them discipline and death, slipped through untouched. Witnesses feared him too much to speak his name. His allies on the commission protected him, and the files that might have doomed him disappeared into drawers that never reopened. While Lepke burned, Anastasia rebuilt, rising through the Mafia ranks, colder, and more calculating than ever. The government thought the killing machine was gone. They were wrong. It had simply found a new king. By 1944, the Midnight Rose was shuttered, the candy jars empty, the back room silent. The men who once decided life and death over a cup of coffee were gone, executed, imprisoned, or erased. The newspapers declared Murder, Inc. finished. But what they didn't understand was that you can't kill a blueprint. What Louis Lepke, Buchalter and Albert Anastasia built wasn't just a murder ring, it was a system, a business model. It proved that organized crime could function with the precision of industry. For the Syndicate, it was the prototype for modern management, specialization, accountability, and efficiency, even in death. After Abe Reles's betrayal, the Commission learned its lesson. Contracts became fewer, quieter, and strictly internal. No more middlemen, no more paper trails. Each family handled its own discipline. Killers no longer gathered in candy stores or back rooms. They operated in shadows, silent and compartmentalized. In its wake, Murder, Inc. left behind a chilling legacy of structure. It taught the Mafia that chaos could be profitable, but order was power. That loyalty was a currency, and silence a weapon. The Syndicate no longer relied on rage or vendetta. It relied on process. The National Murder Bureau was dead, but its logic infected everything that followed, from the rise of Vito Genovese's corporate-style empire to the quiet, efficient executions of the 1950s. The same discipline that once governed a hit list now governed narcotics routes, construction rackets, and casino profits. Even today, investigators trace the DNA of Murder, Inc. through every organized killing that followed. The faces changed, the methods evolved, but the principle endured: murder as management. The last men who lived it, who felt the weight of that system, said it best in hushed tones years later. It wasn't a gang. It was a company.